All right, it's 11. It's on my phone too. Let's get started. Today I want to talk about culture. We've got 2 days this week to talk about culture. And culture's it's a little bit weird to talk about. Amanda's got the sign-in sheet. Culture's a little bit weird to talk about because it's ephemeral. It's nebulous. You know, cigarette smoke. You blow it out and it's ephemeral. You try and grab it and it drifts away. And culture is very much like that. That doesn't mean it's not real, though. It just means it's hard to really get at what you want to talk about. So let me start with an example. Not the Dropkick Murphys, although they're a good example too. So way back when I was in graduate school, I had a friend who was a couple years ahead of me, and she was going to get her PhD. I think it was 97, 98. I don't remember exactly. And she had just gotten herself into biking. And so as a reward for herself, when she finally got her PhD, she was going to have this awesome custom bike built. I think the frames were like $2,000 or something. But at any rate, when she started riding, she decided, or not she decided, but she invited me to go ride with her because she knew that I liked bikes. So one day, me and her husband go riding. Now, I don't know if I ever would have thought of her as an outdoors woman before the bike thing. And I'm not in contact with her, so I don't even know if she still rides. But her husband was very much an outdoors kind of guy. But it was a little bit funny because he showed up for our ride. You know, I was wearing my, stupid spandex shorts, and I had my bike and, all the tools and stuff you need in case you have a flat. And, very standard, but low obnoxiousness kind of outfit. Some of the outfits are really obnoxious. I couldn't even afford the obnoxious outfits. That's how long ago this was. And he shows up, and he's got some worn out Army BDUs that he's cut off, right? I'm sure he's wearing regular underwear underneath them, which means he's going to be really miserable in about 17 miles. I don't remember what shirt he was wearing, but instead of a water bottle on his Huffy, he had a canteen, a big metal canteen with the felt sides that are supposed to keep your, you get it wet and the evaporation keeps your water cool, right? Right on his belt, and his belt was a big Army issue thing. I don't even know what to say. So, what's that? Yes, you got it. So now he's all about outdoor kind of stuff, and he has awesome Jeeps, and I really liked him. But it was a little bit funny, and it's a good thing that no other cyclists came along with this, because he was dressed so wrong as to be humorous, which wasn't nice. And I mean, it was just me, so I wasn't going to laugh at him, but I've been riding for so long that I know sort of the outfit and the whole, I understand, and he didn't, right? He was just wearing his outdoor clothes. And that got me thinking, not about the Dropkick Murphys. So that got me thinking about the difference between a couple of different flavors of outdoors people, right? And it's kind of funny to me. Let's actually not start with Bass Pro. Let's start with REI. So I grew up out in the Midwest, throwing snowballs at cars and running away from incensed drivers, screwing around on the river flats, just doing things that Midwestern kids do, shooting out TVs with BB guns, whatever, just kid stuff, right? But when it came to the sports that I like to do, I always liked sort of the REI flavor of sports. Loved rock climbing, which is really funny considering my build. Always liked bikes and cycling, road bikes and mountain bikes, but I could ever only afford one at once. Camping and hiking were okay, but it didn't have wheels, And if you did put your camper on wheels, all of a sudden that's a different kind of camping, isn't it? But I dreamed about all the cool outdoor adventures you could have. And REI seems to sort of tap into that. But the the most hardcore of the adventure outdoors kind of people have to be folks like Patagonia. And there are some other brands. There's Black Diamond. There's all this stuff. But Patagonia is like an icon of a brand, if you will. Just watch as they scroll through their iconography here, their imagery. They're surfing. You don't surf when you grow up on the Missouri River. When they go fishing, they'll either go deep sea fishing or fly fishing. I don't know why, but that's the way people who can afford Patagonia fish, right? And camping, that's all rock gear there if you're not familiar with the sport. That's also very frightening. Very frightening. But you get the idea. It's mountains, it's outdoors. It's very outdoorsy. It's not cheap. Nowadays a good mountain bike could easily be $3,000-$4,000. So there's that. Rock climbing might cost a couple $100, maybe $1,000 to get into. That's not cheap at all. But when a kid takes up something like club hockey, what does that kit cost, right? That's several $100s. I mean, you're $100 just to get into the skates, right? So it's expensive, but sports are expensive, okay? Now, I could never afford anything from Patagonia ever, because I was in grad school. So I left my dreaming to the more prosaic REI, right? And if you look at the top, you can see REI. They have camping, climbing, cycling, running, paddling, kayaks, right? You get the idea. There's a whole setup of sports that cluster around a certain flavor of outdoorsman, right? That outdoorsman rides bikes, but likely doesn't do it in cutoff BDUs. Right? The fact that some of you are even chuckling means you sort of get it, okay? Now, if we go over here to Bass Pro, and for me, actually, let's go to, everyone here knows Cabela's, right? Where's Cabela's from? Don? Nebraska, right? Outstate. As far as like branding goes, it's a little bit understated compared to Bass Pro, which we have up in North Macon there. But you get the same idea. You go to a Bass Pro and these guys fish, they only sort of fly fish. It's kind of a corner way off in the middle of nowhere. They just fish, right? They get out there. So out of their 3 things going today, 2 of them are fishing. That's like a bass fish, I guess. That would be appropriate for Bass Pro. And then this is a great one. We're gonna have to scroll through. So while cyclists aren't going to wear BDUs unless they're like hipsters trying to be ironic, if you're into this flavor of outdoors, camo is a requirement, right? In fact, there's probably someone in class wearing camo today. You can't have 80 Southerners in a room and not a single one of them have a camo shirt or sweater or cell phone case, right? Somebody has it. And that's groovy. What's that? Do we get one?
No, I've not seen.
Just one? We got a hat? All right. Got to have one. And that's much lower than I would have expected, just given being around here. Now, here's what's kind of interesting. When I start trying to think about these different sports, I think, what's the difference, right? My wife used to call them rich kid sports. I'll admit she was being kind of a shit. Because near as I can tell, the Bass Pro Sports, while there might be a class difference between them and REI, I'm not saying there is, but there might be. While there might be a class difference, maybe more professional versus blue collar, maybe. You'll notice the prices aren't all that different, right? What's a boat cost, right? Even a stupid John boat is $12,000. That's the cheapest thing they have at the store, right? And I see a lot of boats in my neighborhood that aren't John boats, right? And if you get a little flat bottom boat, are you going to row? No, rowing's for hippies that shop at REI. You're going to put a motor on it. I don't know why, but you can't. It's like against the rules. And kayaks, if you buy a kayak at an REI, it's not going to have a fishing mount. If you buy a kayak at a Bass Pro, it's not going to not have a fishing mount, right? And the clothes, right? The clothes are great. I'm going to go hunting. I'm going to shoot me some deer. I'm going to save a little bit of money, right? I'm going to save about $70 on meat costs. So I'm going to buy me a $300 shotgun, entry level. I'm going to buy, I don't even know what a deer tag is in this state, but you guys are pretty inexpensive, which is a good thing. I got to have me some camo pants. That's not cheap. And it does get cold here. I mean, not really, but sort of. So I'm going to buy a camo shirt, a sweater. And so I'm $150 into it for clothing, $300 into it for firearms. We'll say $25 into it for a deer tag. And I'm going to live me off the land and save $30 at the grocery store. I mean, you could do it, and there's cheaper ways to pull it off, obviously. Go ahead.
Isn't the hide worth like $400 alone if you tan it?
If you tan it. Good job. I'm going to wear me some buckskin. Look, if you can make money off it, that's wonderful. A lot of people are going to tell themselves they're going to make money off of it or save money off of it. They're flat out lying to themselves. Now, I'm not picking on anybody. A sport's a sport. You spend money on it to go do these things. But if you were thinking of it economically, right, you wouldn't be getting the $300 shotgun. You'd be getting the $150 one. You wouldn't be necessarily buying the $12,000 John boat at Bass Pro. You'd be buying something used off of Craigslist, right? If you're thinking about it economically, you approach it differently, and it doesn't have much to do with Bass Pro at all, right? That's kind of the point I'm trying to get at here. Again, if you're going to, what I'm trying to get at here is, we could say, as my wife would, that the REI sports are rich kid sports, and the others aren't, but it's not because they cost less. See what I'm getting at? So the fishing boat costs more than the road bike, but you're probably not going to use a fishing boat 3 days a week. Of course, most people buy the road bike and ride it 3 days a week for 2 seasons and then hang it up on the back of the wall. And then we make friends with them. And we wait a little bit. And then we offer to take it off their hand for a few $100s because it's just cluttering up their garage. That's a smart way to do it. Part of why my wife and I have this interesting, entertaining debate is that I married into a farm family, okay? And they don't wear a lot of camo, but I've been around for castrating, I've been around for dehorning, I've been around for butchering. So I've done all that good old boy stuff. I've ridden four-wheeler out in the fields. It's all a lot of fun. The crappie, I only bring it up because of the crappie, right? Crappie. I'm telling you, you don't fish crappie for food because you got to murder a hell of a lot of crappie to make it worthwhile. And sunnies, maybe a big northern, that's all right. That could feed a few people, but it's just like 30 or 40 crappie if you're having people over. It's terrible. Anyway, why is there this difference? It's an interesting question. And why can't my friend or my friend's husband, why can't he show up and ride bike in camo? Or why couldn't I go hunting in biker pants? Well, I'd freeze my ass off if I was up north, but I don't know about here. Maybe you're sitting still a lot, but you get the idea. The thing is we're getting at kind of a cultural difference, aren't we? I mean, you can say it's economic. I think there is a socioeconomic thing there. One of my rock climbing buddies from Pennsylvania, after I moved away, he had to find someone else to climb with, and he was sort of a weird dude. So, I mean, so am I. I get it. Haven't done any of the stuff I used to do when I was up in PA because who am I going to do it with, right? And he was sort of in the same boat. So he found a guy, and he was telling me on the phone, like, he drives an F-150. Like, whatever. Said my friend that drives a Volvo. He couldn't actually really understand what this dude had an F-150 for, right? Now, I realize saying that in Georgia is kind of like, huh? But just as weird as if I said he was an outdoorsman that drove a Volvo, right? That snicker is exactly what he's doing about an F-150 guy that goes rock climbing. right? It's crazy. It's a cultural thing. I mean, I think, and as we go farther through the semester, I think you're going to find that this loads onto, the red-blue political divide in the United States right now. And there may be a little bit of class or occupational differentiation, but don't let that cloud what's going on, because it's not that simple. There's more to it. So that's my first kind of thing I wanted to throw out there. Let me go to another one. So there's another friend I have. Better watch out. If you're my friend, you're going to end up being part of my lectures in 10 years. There's another friend I have who I also went to grad school with, and this guy was an Icelander. And we got along like a house on fire. It was awesome. He's like famous. I'm me. So his awesomeness didn't wear off in a career sense, but that didn't matter. We had a blast. And so there was this period where I went over there and taught a course with him for like 6 weeks. It was great, right? And Iceland's a very strange place. It's European in a lot of ways, right? But then in other ways, it's got a huge American flavor. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One, all throughout the Cold War, we had the Keflavik Air Base there. Of course, that was the only part of Iceland that sided with us. All the rest of them were with the commies. But we had the peninsula. But so there was American rock and roll and music and clothing. Weirdly enough, they sprawl like Americans. Okay, so they didn't even begin to industrialize until after the First or Second World War. I mean, it took them a long time to get rolling. So there's no trains. If you wanted to get around the island, you had to do it in a freighter, which they were all fine with. And so they didn't really start growing until they had cars. And since most of the island is empty and uninhabited, well, most of it's uninhabitable. The part that is habitable is still mostly uninhabited. So they built suburbs and towns the way we build. I mean, it's kind of funny. You go to this place where people have European sensibilities. Gas is literally $8 a gallon in the year 2000. And they're driving 10 miles out to the suburbs where they live. I mean, it's just a hoot. So they're not like Europeans that way. But they are European in some other ways that are a little bit off-putting for an American. I'll just list off a few, but one of the first ones is the pace at which they speak. Okay? So if you want to start an argument between the airbase people and the local Southerners here, just say something about how slow or fast people talk or walk, and it'll start a fight, right? Apart from the pace at which people talk in Iceland, more than the speed with which they talk or the speed with which they don't talk is the spacing. Okay? They'll say something, and then they'll wait a few moments for it to sink in. And sometimes, if you're an American, you're not really sure because those pauses are longer than we're used to, right? If you have an American conversational pace, when someone leaves a pause that long, that's your cue to talk, okay? But if you're having a conversation with an Icelander who's stopping to think and still has a little bit more to say, and you jump in because they're making you nervous, right? You know, you're going to come off as a little bit rude to them, okay? Now, that's fine when it's an Icelander in South Bend, Indiana. They have no choice but to fit in. But when you're the Yank in the middle of Iceland, and they get a lot of tourists, so they're used to people cutting them off, because there's a lot of Americans and the Germans. The Germans are a hoot because the Icelanders are more modest than the Germans, but that's a different discussion. You end up with this really weird thing where they have the impression that we're rude, we cut people off, we can't shut the hell up and think. And we don't even know we're doing it, right? Because you're just trying to have a conversation. And you're a little bit off. But that's just one element of the weirdness. Another element of the weirdness is they'll look at you. All I got to do is, it doesn't even matter who I look at. They're going to be like, how long do we look? He's making me feel weird. Right? Here in the States, if you're walking around in the average city and you meet someone's eye, you catch your eye, you nod your head, you say howdy, whatever, and then you look away. When you catch someone's eye and look them in the eye for very long, that's actually likely to start a fight, right? If you're in the inner city and you catch someone's eye for more than a fraction of a second, you're in trouble. If you're interacting with the cops and you're like looking at them, it's aggressive actually to eyeball someone that hard. So we don't do it. And at the other end, there are some native populations where they won't even look you in the eye. And so as a regular American dealing with indigenous Americans, you walk into their space and eyeball them at all, you're going to make them uncomfortable, right? They just won't look at you. They're going to look at the floor. They're going to look over here because to look at you is rude, right? Okay, the Icelanders, completely opposite. So you walk into a room and everybody turns and they look at you. And then they look you all the way down, see what you're wearing, all the way down to your shoes. Then they look you all the way back up. And then they go back to whatever they're doing. They just want to see who walked in. But they just want to see who walked in. To us, feels extremely rude, right? Almost aggressive. I came across a tourist log while we were there, and this American couple, it was great, right? This American couple had written, Iceland's beautiful, but these people are so obnoxiously rude, it's like they've never seen an interracial couple before, right? Now, having been there for 6 weeks and had these conversations with them, I had this, I had begun to get used to people doing the hairy eyeball to the Americans. But what this woman said was, everywhere me and my boyfriend go, people stare at us like they've never seen us before. And I'm kind of laughing in my head because she's reading this one way, and I'm thinking it's entirely possible they're just looking at you. And they're not actually racist because there aren't enough black people there for them to be racist. The only blacks I ran into was an American basketball player who was playing for one of their teams, and they're like minor celebrities. So if they're looking at them, it's not because they're disapproving, which may well happen here in the United States, right? It's, oh, look at the new people who walked in. It's entirely disconcerting. But then, and it's really weird because, again, they look like Americans, right? There's a lot of Icelanders over here, so there's a lot of Iceland in the American gene pool. So, but dealing with them is just a little off. There's a couple more. So I said that their cities are kind of Midwestern or Southern in their sprawl, nothing like our Northeastern cities. The city is also kind of a euphemism. The biggest town is Reykjavik, which has about 150,000. How big is this county? And the second biggest town is Akureyri, which has 40,000, I think. So, city, right? But when it comes to their personal space, they're kind of European, okay? So the first thing is you go to take a shower, and their showers are small. You always have one arm or the other up against the wall, right? And eventually you just get used to it. But if you're in an American shower, I mean, how do we sell our new homes? We show people how big the shower is, right? And ideally, you don't want to be able to touch either wall. Ideally, you want to be able to have a couple people in there with you and not be crowded. That's a good shower. It works out this way in the restrooms too. So they don't tend to, or at least where I was, there weren't big men's and women's restrooms. You'd walk down a building like this at the college and there'd be, where the restrooms were, there'd be a line of restroom doors, kind of like at your house, except there'd be 6 or 8 of them, one on each, 3 or 4 on each side, and they'd all be unis, okay? Which is a little weird for an American in the first place. Girl comes out of the bathroom, and I'm like, but I really gotta go, okay? But they're not weird about it. I was weird about it because I'm not an Icelander, right? And then again, you get in and you got your coat on because there it honestly is chilly sometimes. And you got your backpack because you're right at the college and you're crashing into one wall or the other. I mean, there's just no way to not be rubbing up against things because their spaces are tighter. Even their parking lots are, you open the door and you're kind of squeezing out. It's not the way we do things. And walking down the hall, you walk down the hall at the mall or at the college, and you're bumping into people right and left. They're rubbing your shoulders there. There's no orderly people going this way on the right side and people going this way on their right side, so you're not crashing into each other. And they're not so paranoid about touching each other that rubbing shoulders is weird, because that's just part of the way they are, okay? But as an American, if you're close enough for me to touch you, and I'm not sleeping with you, you're too close. That's the way we are about space. And so, you're always like hemmed in. You're hemmed in the bathroom. You're hemmed in the shower. You're crashing into people. It's weird. And then you try and talk to them, and they're standoffish, slow talkers. They always act like you're interrupting them. I mean, it takes a long time to get used to that. But we don't need to go. We don't need to go to Iceland. This is an experience that many of you have had. But again, nice kid, growing up in the Midwest, friendly, nice to my elders. And I go out to Philly, and Philly was brutal. Moving to Philly from Indiana. First of all, the people at the counter. You walk into like a Chick-fil-A. They don't have Chick-fil-A, but you walk into like a Chick-fil-A, and the girl at the counter thing doesn't even stop talking to her friend while she rings you up. Here I am, I'm trying to give you my money. Customer service, she's not even gonna bother talking to you. You try talking to her and she's like, dude, get out of my space. It's a little bit weird. Although it's really freeing, because after about 3 months of that, you realize, oh my goodness, I don't need to be nice to people. Right? Think about how much of your day is spent being nice to people you don't even know and don't care about. You're at the grocery, you're like, oh, pardon me, I gotta walk this way. You're at the door, you're like, oh, no, you first. No, you first, right? You can't get inside the door, you can't get outside the door because everyone's being pleasant and friendly. And, here it's not just that the etiquette is different. We actually put a lot of almost social value or even moral value. Someone who's rude at the door, we're not likely to think that they're rude at the door. We're, as non-Philly people, likely to read that as, that's a rotten human. Okay? So you get used to Philly, and you come down here, and it's exactly the opposite, right? And I'm not making any of these stories up. So we got this nice apartment complex when we first got down here, and so I'm sitting in the hot tub in January, because it's awesome. You can sit in the hot tub in January with my 10-year-old daughter or whatever she was at the time. And this, nice looking woman in a bikini comes and sits in the hot tub with us. I'm like, oh, well, this is not bad. And she's got a little kid, so her kid's there. And, we're not 30 seconds into talking, and she's like, oh, have you found your church home yet? Those of you who've had my classes before are familiar with this, but if you are from here and you haven't been out of here, it's not polite to ask people about their religion anywhere else. Maybe Alabama, but never has someone walked right up and not only asked what my religion was, but asked me what church I was going to in an environment where by all accord, there should be a level of formality, right? Remember I said, she's about my age, she's nice looking, she's in a bikini. You know what happens when you're in an environment where your formal outside is compromised? You maintain that social distance with pretend formality. Does that make sense? So when you're in the gym locker room and you're stripped down naked, you don't strike up a conversation with the woman next to you about what hairspray she uses. You get your little bubble, and that's how we all respect each other's dignity. So here I am in the hot tub with this woman that I don't know, who's not my wife. Both of us are wearing almost nothing, and she's asking me about church, right? No, not appropriate. I mean, there's actually not much conversation you can have in that environment. When you go to a hotel and you're all in the hot tub together, hi, right? But when it's your neighbor, tell me about church. No. It just doesn't work that way. Now, it's not a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's a difference thing. And that's kind of what I'm trying to get at here. But it's the kind of thing you only recognize if you get outside of your comfort zone, outside of your bubble. The fun thing is you don't have to go traveling to a different part of the country to get outside your bubble. Sometimes you just need to go over to the other side of town because they have a very different bubble. And I've noticed you all have very different bubbles depending upon what flavor of Southerner you actually are, right? That's what culture is, right? So how do we define the kid in the camo shorts on a road bike ride? How do we define the climber who sees himself as an outdoorsman but is unnerved by the guy with the F-150? How do we talk about an American of Icelandic descent and an Icelander having an awkward conversation because they can't get the pacing correctly, right? That's culture, but what is it, right? Okay, so we've had crappy up for a long time. I like calling it crappy. Okay, so that's blank. Here we go. So the thing is that when we're talking about culture, we're actually talking about, well, I guess we're going to start here and work our way back. It's the stuff of life. You've got material and non-material, and that's really all of humanity. And with the material side, it's, well, as it says, life stuff. I made up that word. But your houses, your food, your tools, your religion, not your religion, but your religious items, those are all parts of culture, right? From the menorah to the chalice to the rosary to your little statue of Buddha to, all of those things are physical things that go with your religion. Like your religion's non-material, but the things that go with your religion are material. Your economic tools, over on 96, there's by the Kroger, there's some homemade car shop, which looks a little bit interesting. And the guy's got, I think it's Suzuki, a teeny little Japanese pickup for sale. I love that thing. I don't think it's street legal. It's got right-hand drive. I've gone up to see it. It's got right-hand drive and a stick shift and a bed that's about this big. It's adorable. But over in Japan, this is the F-150. This is the way Japanese folks do the stuff that needs to get done in life, right? And if you're a contractor, you can use this thing as a tool. If you're a homeowner, well, a tool to make money. If you're a homeowner, you can use it to haul your IKEA crap or whatever it is they use in Japan. It's a tool, right? But it's a different kind of truck than we use. It's still a truck. It's still gasoline powered, carries stuff, runs off gas. You wouldn't think there's a big difference, but in fact, like I said, I'm not even sure those are legal here. It's a cultural difference, and it has to do with how we meet our economic needs, right? Houses, so the Icelanders had much, much smaller homes. I think there was we visited like a brain surgeon, I kid you not, and I think his home must have been 1,200 square feet. What for us would be a very small home, but for him was a small house. Their style, very modern. I don't know why, but they like modern architecture and do a pretty good job of it. So you're in their homes, they're nice, but they don't really feel cozy because you're not wired for that kind of home. But they do home things. I don't know. They eat, make babies, do whatever you do in homes. Right? That's the physical stuff. And if you start thinking about the tools that we use, if you're a regular American, your phone, your iPod, your computer, I mean, that's how we do about 7/8 of the stuff that we need to do. Your clothes counts, your car counts, the bags you carry your junk around in count. Even the ways that y'all brought something to drink to class count, right? Those are all the physical parts of culture. Now, the physical part backs up against the non-physical, or what's called the non-material. I've never seen anybody quantify it, but I'm sitting here thinking in my head, and I'm thinking the non-material is really the important part, and the physical really ends up being kind of the veneer, but I'd have to think quite a bit harder about that. You'll notice that most of the examples I gave are non-material, right? Even the difference between a fishing boat or a road bike, well, that's itself a material difference. That's a material difference that results from the value or the non-material difference of what's actually a worthwhile way to spend your free time if you want to spend it outdoors. I hope that makes some sense. Etiquette ends up being the first thing you bump into when you experience any sort of culture shock. And in many ways it's interesting because it feels really shallow, but it's still deeply, deeply off-putting, okay? So if you're walking along and somebody bumps you in the shoulder, that, if you are one kind of person, is a huge sign of disrespect. And in some cultures, you can have fights over something like disrespect, when in fact, it's a non-thing to them, right? Whether or not you hold the door for the person behind you, you let the door shut behind you. If someone's close enough, that's a huge, dissing, right? If you were in Minnesota, you don't hold the door open because you're letting out all of that heat. If it's 10 below and you're heating the house to 65, that's a 75-degree heating difference, so you don't stand around with the door open. But here, when it's, 50 on a cold day and you're heating to 60, it's much less expensive. Well, hold the door, at least until summer, right? Then you can just feel that balmy sauna heat come into your air-conditioned house. It's a different thing, but that's etiquette, right? Notice how also even the conversation spacing that I was talking about is etiquette. How fast you walk falls under etiquette. How you open and close a conversation falls under etiquette. And when people start examining these at the very specific level, the kind of tactical level, how it happens on the street, you end up with some really, really, you end up with differences on everything. There have been people who have studied how fast Americans walk in American cities. And you end up with a fairly tight correlation between the amount of economic activity and how fast people walk. Okay? But when you're experiencing it, you're judging the people ahead of you who are going slow. You're like, what the hell? Why don't they speed up? Or you're the person that's going slow. Nothing wrong with that, right? And the person over here is, you don't say, oh, they must have just come from Atlanta, where things are a little bit faster than here. You're saying, what an annoying, razzle-fragging son of a, they think they got somewhere to go, they think, right? Just because they're walking a little bit faster, we start spinning this story about how obnoxious they are, how self-important they are, which is really hilarious. But tell me I'm wrong. Actually, don't. how close can someone talk to you? I had this friend, his name was Jihad. I'm not kidding. He was Palestinian. He's changed his name on Facebook recently. He was a very intense man. Great guy, I love him, but very intense. And boy, you get him talking about Palestine and Israel, he's really intense. We Americans aren't that intense. Like when someone starts getting worked up about politics, we're all like, bye, see ya. Yeah, I'm out the door. You can argue about that on Facebook with your other crazy friends. But to him, this is meaningful. This is important. And it's intense. And when he gets really worked up, he's standing like this. He's a close talker. Except, how close can you talk? When you start thinking about it, you'll realize everything you do is actually bounded by these teeny little rules. Okay? Now, there's a whole chapter on socialization where we talk about how you get these teeny little rules into your head. But until you put yourself in a situation where you are culturally uncomfortable, you don't have the faintest clue how many of those little rules there are, because those little rules govern everything. How close you can sit to somebody next to you, how people fill in when they start to come in, maybe not, further on when you all have sort of like gotten your territory staked out. But on day one, people fill in a very kind of specific pattern, because it wouldn't be right to both of you sit like right here, right next to each other if the whole rest of the thing's empty. You kind of like space out a little bit. So space, interaction. This is a good one. I've used this one before, sorry. But every time I move to a new place, the drivers drive me nuts, right? I swear to goodness, the people on 75 here are the stupidest drivers there ever were in the whole world. That might be a little unfair. But I could go on and on and on and on about what's wrong with the drivers on 75. But driving's a little bit like an accent too. When I moved to Philly, I couldn't believe how people drove. Keep in mind, I'm coming from Indiana, right? And Philly, people are fast. And you know what? No one's going to let you in when they merge on the freeway. And they follow you really close. And if you're coming from the Midwest and someone's riding your butt, you get kind of aggressive. Can't believe he's that close, right? And then you get mad and you go slower. Or you jam your brakes, try and scare them. You're going to die if you move to the East Coast with that attitude. If you don't get run up the rear, which isn't as likely to happen as you think, because this is the way they all drive, so they're used to it, you're going to kill yourself with a heart attack, right? So at some point, you put on your seatbelt, you make sure your airbags are working, and you just drive, right? Because you have to. And so they're aggressive, they fill in, they take their right-of-ways very quickly and assertively. And at some point, like for me, it ended up being really, really refreshing. Just like I don't have to actually be nice to anybody. If there's a hole, you hit your blinker and you fill the hole. And if someone else is driving like an idiot, that's between them and the cops. As long as I don't have to touch my brakes, I don't got a problem with it, right? But that only works because I lived there for long enough to get used to it. And then you hit I-75. I can't merge. They're not moving over for me. It's crazy, right? It's entirely about etiquette and how you interact. There was one thing that Philly did, which I just loved. We call it the Philly left. When you're all lined up and there's not a lot of room and you want to go left, but you know that when the light turns green, you're going to have to wait for that long-ass line of cars over there to go. The Philly left, which they all expect, so you're not going to cause a crash doing it there. Try it here. Try it. Light turns green, you drag race off of it and take the left, right? Out there, sometimes 2 or 3 people could get through, and everybody's great because it's actually lessening the congestion. But here, you're going to make people mad. They They're going to chase you down and start a fight because you didn't wait your turn. Okay, now, is anyone hurt? Absolutely not. It's a perceived understanding of disrespect, taking turns in the public space, that has everything to do with the difference in understanding of how those turns are supposed to go. It's, again, everywhere you look, culture ends up coming into these things. That's etiquette. Now, so far, we're just talking about how you interact with strangers or even friends. We haven't even gotten to values. Why did my one friend not like the F-150? Well, if you're a Jewish dude who's a professional, who's lived in the big American East Coast cities for the first 40 years of your life, the F-150 stands for a lot of things. Like, first of all, what kind of mileage do these things get? Like 15 if you're lucky, right? And then, of course, if you live down here, you got to jack it up and put it on 35s. So now you're down to 8 miles per gallon. Like the sound of tread on the highway is the sound of burning money. His little Volvo, stick shift, 4-door, right? I think it got 30 miles to the gallon. It was cute. He could squeeze his road bike in the back. I'm not sure how he didn't have chain marks all over his upholstery, but he did it. He was offended by the gas mileage. Not just, that's an impractical choice for me, offended by the gas mileage. You schmuck. What makes you think that you get to make such a stupid decision? Right? It's kind of mind-blowing. But think about it. From his perspective, if you're driving around getting 12 miles to the gallon on a good day, global warming, it's more you than him, right? High gas prices, it's more you than him. It's why are we in Iraq? Well, I guess we're not now, but some would say oil. How do you like that F-150? Now, I'm not saying he's right, but I am saying that's what the world looked like to him. So someone who drove something big and obnoxious like an F-150 is the equivalent of saying, look at me, I can burn money and I don't care about any of the rest of you. I see the class gets really quiet because I'm kind of like picking on the locals, aren't I? Now, again, I'm not saying he's right, but I am saying that's what the world looks like to him, right? It's actually a statement of what's good and what's bad. And driving a small car that fits well in the city is not just, this is practical for me, it's also, I'm not as big a part of the problem. It's a value judgment. See how that works? Absolutely fascinating. Let's see, what are some other good ones? I mean, again, all you got to do is scratch the surface and they're just about everywhere. This one's controversial. And I don't want to get waylaid by the arguments because I don't care about the arguments at the moment. But again, up there to the good people in the Philly area, but New York's going to be just about the same way, they see gun control arguments as self-evidently smart. Okay? Now don't go into, the gun control people don't get yourself into an argument over that. But I'm telling you, their perception is the fewer guns are around, the fewer problems we're going to have. Okay? So that's the way this kid's going to look at it. And if I say, hey, Mike, his name was Mike, I kid you not. Hey, Mike, let's go look at my gun collection. Right? What do you need guns for, Michael? You live in the suburbs of Philadelphia. What are you going to shoot? The squirrels? No, I need a shotgun. Why do you need a shotgun? NRA. I got a sticker on my truck, see? Yeah. If I go too far down that road, he's not going to be my friends. He's not going to be my friend, right? Because our values are that deeply different. okay? Guns aren't a good thing. They're a necessity for the military and the cops, but they're not a thing we want the average citizen to have. That's going to be his perspective. So that if you're like, yay guns, yay guns, yay guns, it's not just, that's an impractical decision for me. It's, you are part of the problem. You're contributing to the trouble we have. What happens when someone breaks into your house and steals your guns? Right? All of a sudden, the next Sandy Hook is your fault. Now, that's not how the politicians from the other side of the aisle phrase it. But again, I don't want you to get into the political discussion. I want you to get into the mind, the life way, the understanding. Now, here's the thing. The flip side is you come down here and people love their guns. They'll talk to you about their guns, and they'll talk to you about their guns and their guns. And all I got to do is say guns, and I can strike up a conversation with anyone I don't know. Guns is even better than football for starting conversations with random guys, and most girls too. But that's fine, because the thing is that if you are on the other side of the fence, if you're not the Jewish kid working a professional job in Philadelphia driving a Volvo, he really was almost a stereotype. If you're not him, if you're here and you've got whatever job the locals around here have, and you're driving a pickup because it's a decent family car, not having guns is irresponsible, isn't it? If you approach it from the mindset of a pro-gun person, if you don't have guns, who's protecting your children? Who's protecting your home? I mean, the cops only show up after most of the trouble's over. Like my friend Mike, the cops are going to show up and they're going to handle it because we don't expect wackos to have guns. Over here, we're expecting wackos to have guns. And if wackos have guns, then you got to have guns too. I mean, this is partly why the two sides can't actually talk to each other, because the values underneath it, well, here's what's weird. The values are the same, but their approach to the values are diametrically opposite. If you're from this side, my left, your right, yes. If you're on this side of the aisle, the problem isn't that bad guys have guns, although that is part of the problem. The real problem is that not enough of the good guys have guns, right? When bad stuff happens, you want the cops to come help. Who are the cops? The good guys with guns. If you drive around in your car with jumper cables, because sometimes someone might need a jump, because you're a handy person and you care about people, then you should probably have a 9mm in your glove box, because there are bad people around, right? And the bad people aren't just in the worst neighborhoods, because they have cars too. So you can't isolate yourself in North Macon and think nothing's going to happen, right? But again, and so the value is public safety. How we get to public safety, that part of the value, is completely opposite. So when these guys say, we got to crack down on guns, these people here, you're taking away my ability to take care of my family, right? When these guys say, we need more guns, these guys here, we already have enough gun violence. We don't need more of the tools that cause these problems in the world. And as long as they're each committed to those values and they're not thinking about the way the other person is hearing what it is they're saying, they're actually talking right past each other. See how that works? And it's a cultural thing, but it's a cultural thing that ends up in huge political fights. It's a cultural thing that'll keep us from actually liking each other. Isn't that fascinating? And why does he think this? Because he grew up in New York and Philadelphia. That's the long and the short of it. And why does our F-150 kid think the other? Because he grew up here. Right? You're working with the same kind of thing. They just end up in different places, and they end up with different values. Okay? Beliefs is a weird one. Beliefs is a weird one. I put up I had a menorah on the last one, and I got a boot on this one. When you say belief, religion comes to mind, and surely religious differences play in terms of culture. And beliefs lay the foundations for stuff that goes on top of that, certainly. But beliefs can also be a little bit problematic because, on the other hand, why do they matter, right? So if we step back a couple of days in the class, you'll notice when I was talking about what holds society together, economic interdependence, because we don't actually have to like each other. We don't have to believe what each other believes. You could, going off of that, make the case that beliefs don't matter, right? Well, they might not matter for holding society together that way, but they matter on another level. But it doesn't have to be religious either. I don't know what to say about beliefs. I thought I had something, and then it went away. Until that comes back, if it comes back, I'll go with something light. So I told you I spent a little time in Gettysburg, right? I used that example last time. Gettysburg's a funny place because half the people believe in ghosts, 3/4. Gettysburg's one of the quote-unquote most haunted towns in America. My children think there was a ghost in our house, which is what we told people because it was Gettysburg, right? You can go on a ghost hunt any day of the week. It's like every ghost show goes there eventually. Even the chair of my old department, the sociologist, his last 10 or 15 years worth of writings have been about people who believe in ghosts. Because as a sociologist, you can't write directly about ghosts, but he's a medium. My professional sociology atheist friends are mediums that talk to ghosts. Okay. But that's a belief difference, right? We come here and people aren't going to be nearly as ghostly, but they're going to be Christian. What that matters has more to do with the implications and whether or not people follow through on the implications. But that's beliefs.
Could it be how you raise your kids?
What's that?
Could it be how you raise your kids? Like, I'm Italian, so we believe the kid comes first. It's always like the kid. And you have like some other cultures that are like, or even the way my belief is like, you shouldn't go out. You know, you raise your kid, you don't have a babysitter.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have some cultures that, you know, I work hard, I deserve to have my time for myself. So
I like that. And you're actually getting at the heart of sort of what the problem is. As a belief, that ties very closely to value, right? So we said, what do you value as good or bad? The beliefs and the values are almost one and the same, right? But yes, you're 100% correct. It certainly works that, like the mommy wars is a great one. Here's what I think about children, so this is the way I'm going to raise my children. It's very much based on belief. Like, here's an example that does work with belief. We know that the South is Christian. Nothing wrong with that. It's funny because the ding couldn't come at a better time. But I just had a flashback to Jerry Seinfeld when he was talking about, 20 years ago, his friend was gay. Not that there's anything wrong with that. And I'm thinking, boy, this is what I just did with Christians, isn't it? The South is Christian. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But I really mean, it's fine. We are who we are. That's neither here nor there. But the flavor of Christianity we have here tends to be a little bit conservative, right? And as a result of being a little bit conservative, we tend to favor fairly traditional gender roles. Now, it doesn't mean that all the women here are barefoot and pregnant and wearing skirts by any stretch of the imagination. But it does mean, on average, they're a little bit more old-fashioned, right? And in the Philly area, they're a little bit more progressive, okay? Which is interesting because for what you're talking about, there's a very discernible difference in the physical way people are here that ties back to that conservatism with gender roles. So it's not uncommon to see dresses and skirts around here. In the Philly area, you never saw dresses and skirts. If it wasn't a formal, the women were in pants. And even when they were doing business, it was at least as often a pantsuit as a skirt suit, right? Whereas here, there are women wear skirts, and it's not a big deal. And it's not a big deal. That may have something to do with why we still, just last weekend or the weekend before, I don't remember exactly, we went to my daughter's middle school beauty pageant. They don't call it a beauty pageant, they just call it the pageant, right? But for everyone who's not from the South, the pageant thing is a little odd. And if we go far enough back, the beauty pageant really was what matters about a woman is that she's beautiful. Now, thankfully, they didn't have a swimsuit section for the 12-year-old girls, because that would have been really too weird. But what are we saying about the value of women if the idea is to get up, sing a song, look pretty, wear your dress, and how do they do that with their hands? They do the walk, right? With the it's odd, right? Now, if you grow up here, it's not weird. If you're not from here, it's a little weird, okay? Now, why are we doing this here and not other portions of the country? I don't have an answer to that, but I can hypothesize it may well be because when it comes to gender, we're just a little bit more old-fashioned than elsewhere, right? It doesn't mean you have to be old-fashioned. It doesn't mean you have to be progressive. It just means if we add everybody up, they're just going to be a little bit off compared to Philly, right? See what I'm saying? Now, that's a hypothesis. We'd have to test it. I'm just guessing. But hopefully that shows how hard it is to try and get from the behaviors and the material components here through the values to the actual beliefs, right? The values are a little bit easier to see than the beliefs, and we can say we believe things, and sometimes how we fill in those beliefs ends up different than the way they really are. The book makes a distinction between ideal culture and real culture. Your grandma used to say, pay attention to what people do, not what they say. And that's kind of the difference there. That's a good example. I'm glad you brought that one up. Okay, this is a heavy slide, but it's not really. I was trying to think about how to fit this into what we've already done so that you have a certain sense of clarity. Because again, culture is a challenge. It's an awesome challenge. It's actually my favorite. One of my dissertation focuses, or my grad school focuses, was culture because it's so much fun to think about. But think about, we talked about social construction of reality, and we talked about symbolic interaction so far, okay? Culture is what you get when you take those other things and add them all up, all right? So symbolic interaction, remember the point there was humans make meaning out of their context, right? I'm standing here now. What does this mean to me? What am I doing? And we make that meaning out of interactions with others through symbols, right? Now, we're all grown-ups here because this is a college classroom. So the symbols that we're using are symbols that have 18 or 20 or 40 or 70 years of usage to us. They're meaningful to us because we've got this huge background. But they include words which we share in common and which we learned in common. And because it's a sociology class, we're actually coming up with new words that mean new ideas, right? You get that. That part makes sense, okay? Now, that's symbolic interaction. How do I make meaning? How do you make meaning? Social construction takes that one step further, okay? Because we don't have a meaningful interaction unless you and I have similar meanings of what's going on, right? If I see this as something fundamentally different than what you see, we're not going to have a successful classroom. And we can even go a step further. The very definition of schizophrenia as a mental disease is that you're not carrying around the same reality in your head as the rest of us, right? And you know, schizophrenia is a weird one, but when someone says he's having a conversation with this person over here, and I don't see that person, one of us is incorrect about our interpretation of reality. The only way we're going to find out which one of us it is by bringing more of us in to see what we say, right? I see what I see, he sees what he sees. We're having a disagreement about what's actually there. But the real bugger with schizophrenia is these guys aren't seeing phantoms. They're not seeing ghosts. They're seeing real, actual other human beings. They're hearing real, actual other sounds, right? These phenomena to them are every bit as real as the person sitting next to you is, okay? So we have to have that shared construction of reality. Now, remember the example we talked about? If you take a Frenchie and drop him into an American reality, there'll be a certain amount he can figure out because there's a lot of overlap, but without the language, he's not going to understand everything the same way you do. Now, he's not schizophrenic, but he's also not up to speed. When you get a 6-year-old, if someone brought their kid to class, they could sit here, we could have a conversation, we could actually be very offensive, and the kid would have no idea because the kid doesn't have enough background to recognize when we might be using double entendres and when we're not. Actually, the kid doesn't have enough background to even understand most of what we're talking about, right? Wouldn't even be able to follow. Just have to play on the iPad and be quiet. Now, when you take and you add all this stuff up, that's what culture is, okay? That's what culture is. Now, there's this time thing that happens with culture, or accumulation thing, perhaps. If we started talking about the culture of the Millies, the youngest generation right now, that's going to be a very specific conversation about what's happening on Instagram, Tumblr, not Facebook, YouTube. It'll be the youngsters will know who the different characters are, the grown-ups won't. If I didn't have a 13-year-old, I wouldn't know any of it either. Right? PewDiePie is a part of Millie's culture. It's not a part of my culture. It's a part of their culture, okay? So there's a currency, meaning how current it is. But if we take a step back and say, on a broad scale, what are the 10 most important works in Western culture? We're not going to be talking about something that happened in the last week and a half with the Millies. We're actually talking about something that happened in the last 500 or 1,000 years in terms of literature, right? It might be Shakespeare. Now, not everybody reads Shakespeare, but Shakespeare is so important that his ideas exist whether or not you read them, right? Every single one of you could put together a Romeo and Juliet love story. Those of you that haven't seen Romeo and Juliet may well have seen Grease, right? You're familiar with it even without being familiar because his ideas are so important and done so well, they've infected the culture, right? So culture can be what we're doing right now, but it can also be what's written. And so you can see how important something like writing, Gutenberg and the printing press, were to the development of culture. Because otherwise, all we have is what we remember as a group. And tribal people are great with oral culture. They're far better than we ever could be with oral culture because we've largely forgotten how to remember. But that's okay because we write it down. And it goes into the archives. Now, on the downside is Shakespeare wins. There's not much we know, or we could find out if we cared, but there's not necessarily much from 300-400 years ago that's still an active part of our culture because it's kind of forgotten. That's why I brought up the PewDiePie thing. PewDiePie's right now, people are talking about him. That keeps him alive. Shakespeare's long dead, but people are talking about him in some high school classroom someday, today, somewhere, today. That's what keeps him alive. Shakespeare's drinking buddy may have written as much as Shakespeare, but his stuff didn't stand the test of time, and it's lost. Does that make sense? So when I say it's accumulation of all of our knowledge, there's a yes, but. There's yes, but it's got to be current. And we can write it down, but if it falls out, it doesn't matter if it's written down. Okay? All right, now, the very last point there, and then I'll kill it for today. Culture seems kind of shallow. Notice I started talking about what pants you wear when you go bike riding. I talked about how, whether or not you're allowed to drag race and make a left turn in front of everyone else at a stoplight. As long as you don't make a crash, that's pretty shallow, okay? And when we think about culture, and even when you start looking at cultural sociology, it tends to be kind of stylish, because style ends up being really important, or kind of a current expression of culture. The difference between REI and Cabela's, it's a style. I mean, it's a style. It's the same amount of money, but one wears spandex and the other wears camo, but it's a style. However, if we think culture is happening at the stylistic level, we're actually missing the bigger picture, because at the stylistic level is where the easy discussions are and the fun discussions are. But if you think this through, what I was talking about accumulating human knowledges, and when I was talking about this zeroing in on values and beliefs, you'll recognize if you take that train of thought all the way to the end, culture is actually, because it's knowledge, it's how human groups meet their animal needs. Okay? We can worry about something on the internet because we don't need to worry about clean water. But if the water system broke down tomorrow, we would very quickly have to resurrect how do we get clean water. That's the first and foremost thing we need. If Kroger's went up in flames tomorrow, even worse. If the seed corn, right, because it's all cloned corn, if the seed corn got a virus that affected that strain of corn and wiped out half of our yield, we would very quickly have to relearn how to get food, okay? And at its core, culture is about how this group of humans meets those animal needs. That's first and foremost. And everything else lays up on top of that. Here's a great example. You ever hear folks say, Native Americans, they were so deep, they were so in tune with the environment, they used every part of the animal? The reason the Native Americans were like this was not that they were some magical species of human. They were just like you and me. Only using every part of that animal was being efficient. It was being respectful, but it was also being efficient. And notice that respect also built into the sustainability of the resource they were using. Right? You don't have to worry about it because the system is doing it for you. You get to worry about YouTube. And while YouTube seems superficial, how many of you are going to have jobs in the future where you spend 80% of your day on the computer? It's going to be most of you. So YouTube seems superficial, but those are the tools you're going to have to make a living with, right? The computer, virtual worlds. So yeah, it's what you wore to class, but it's also how we're existing as animals. Fascinating. All right, comments, question, reaction, reply, editorial response. All right, thanks, and we'll see you on Wednesday. Have a good day.